The Middle East is Muslim. They're Muslim countries. Yes. Because I was born in Britain and I love in Britain. Probably the same reason you live in Britain. It's a great place. Yeah, I'm just answering. Yeah. So, in Israel, in Islam, and I'm not against Islam, the Quran is a good book. If you're a Muslim, keep following Islam, keep following your Quran. In the Quran it says, all blessings and good things come from Allah. So I ask you, why has Israel got loads of blessings and the countries around them haven't? They're a godforsaken mess, sadly. Why is that when the Quran says all blessings and good things come from Allah? Why is Allah blessing Israel? Do you know Israel has got one Nobel Prize for science per head of population than any other country in the world? They invented the Intel chip used in computers and laptops. Satellite navigation. Signed and invented in Israel. Drip feed irrigation. The best use of irrigation with the least water invented in Israel. Why does Israel get all these blessings, but the countries around them don't? In most countries, they're killing each other. We are Sunni Muslims killing Shia Muslims. Shia Muslims killing Sunni Muslims. I say to you Muslims, return to your Quran. In the Quran, Allah says, do not set up sects of Islam. But they have done. Sunni, Shia, Wahhabi, Ismaili. It doesn't mention in the Quran. There's one Quran, it's a small simple book. Just follow that and don't splinter up into different groups. You just end up fighting each other, which is what's happening. Any countries which don't have problems like that are countries where everyone is a Sunni Muslim. But in countries where there's Sunnis and Shia,
Since 1979,
they're in conflict, usually killing each other.
I'm saying that
Iran and Saudi Arabia got lots of oil. It's a blessing. It even mentions in the Quran that there's black gold under the sands. They're sabotaging each other's oil output.
and I don't
They don't
compromise.
benefit from it, they can't sell as much oil.
What is the
The
evidence?
Iranians, possibly through the Shia proxies in Yemen, they just bombed the two main oil refineries in Saudi Arabia.
The person answered what you
Dumb.
told him. You never lost.
So, return to the Quran, and I'll tell you another piece of good news that's got to you before you read the Quran. It solves the Israel-Palestine issue. In the Quran, it says the children of Israel will return. It says in the Quran the Jews will be scattered around the world, but they will return. So accept Israel's right to exist. The children of Israel have returned, as Allah promised in the Quran. Now groups like Hamas, Hezbollah, Al-Qaeda, ISIS, they want to destroy Israel and kick the Jews out, kill them or send them back to Europe. Who is going to win? Allah and his prophecies, or Al-Qaeda, Hamas, Hezbollah and ISIS? Are those groups powerful enough to defeat Allah and his prophecies? When Israel was recreated by the United Nations in 1948, the Arab countries around them attacked Israel, tried to destroy it. Whose side was Allah on in that war? Did Allah back the winners, or did Allah back the losers? Clue, Israel won. A war that didn't start, but it won. 1967, 5 Arabs again tried to attack and destroy Israel, and in their own words, drive the Jews into the sea. So which side did Allah back in that war? The winners or the losers? There's a clue. Israel won, again, in only 6 days. There's a pattern there which even the stupidest Muslim ought to be able to recognise. When Allah says the children of Israel are going to return, and they have done, don't against it. You can't fight against Allah. But the good news is, when the Muslims love their Quran more than they hate Israel, then they'll make peace with Israel and live happily ever after. How many billions of dollars have the Arabs spent on weapons to try and destroy Israel with? They could have spent that money on education, on schools and universities. But you know, there's not one Arab university in the top 500 of world's universities. But if they spent those billions on universities instead of weapons, it'd be a different story. Do you know, during the golden age of Islam, when the Muslims follow their Quran and were deserving of Allah's blessings, they're the best universities in the world. They made advances in mathematics, astronomy, medicine. Meanwhile, Christian Europe was in the Dark Ages. In Europe, it was illegal to translate the Bible into the language of the masses. It was only allowed in Latin, and only priests and politicians were allowed to learn Latin. Sadly, 700 years ago, the Muslim world stagnated. Their leaders became lazy and corrupt, and they abandoned science and education. Meanwhile, in Europe, brave people translated the Christian Gospels into the local language, and then empowered by that, Europe started progressing, and they caught up the Muslim world and overtook it. The only way the Muslim world can catch up with Europe is by stopping going against their Quran. That's the only way to deserve Allah's blessings. Invest in your own people, in good quality education. Give equality to women so you get a well-balanced society. And you too could be like Europe. Instead of having to get in boats to cross the Mediterranean to try and have a good life. There are tens of millions of Muslims who've left the Muslim world, not to go to another Muslim country, but to go to the West. America, Australia, Canada, New Zealand, Germany, Sweden, Britain, etc., etc. But you don't find Europeans trying to get a rickety old boat into Bangladesh to improve their lives. They're not going to Pakistan to overstay their visas to go through the Pakistani schooling system. And as I say, it can be solved just like that. Stop going against the Quran, invest in education, give equality to women, and get democracy. Very important, get democracy. All around the Muslim world, they're fighting each other because one guy wants to be the leader. In the West, we have elections every 4 or 5 years. Whoever wins becomes a government. So if you want to be in charge in the West, you're going to have good policies, you put for the people, and if they give good policies, you get voted into power, and no one dies. In Syria and all those places around there, the dictator stays in power because it doesn't allow elections. So you can't have a change of government without a big revolution. And I'll tell you another thing, if you want peace, don't try and ban nuclear weapons, don't ban armies. No two democracies have ever been to war with each other. If you want peace, spread democracy. That's all you're going to do. And those democracies will still have armies, just in case, but they won't use them. If they've got a problem with another country, the diplomats get together and resolve it. So if you want peace, spread democracy. I'll say it again, no two democracies have ever been to war with each other. There's been dictator against dictator, dictator against democracy, even democracy against dictator, but never democracy against democracy. And that's a nice thought. When there's democracy everywhere, no more wars. So, which country has done the most to spread democracy? There's two that stand out, America and Britain. All Britain's colonies, former colonies, were invited to join the British Commonwealth. The only condition of membership is you had to be a democracy. So all these dictatorships in the third world who join the British Commonwealth are all democracies. Cars and our equipment and sell us cheap food. Not a good policy. The only other country that spreads democracy is America. Why is Eastern Europe got democracy? Because America won the Cold War, so those former communist countries are now democracies. 50 years ago, every country in Latin America was a dictatorship. Now they're all democracies, apart from Cuba. Thanks to American foreign policy. It hasn't been pretty along the way, but now they've all got democracies. Great. So that's the answer to the Middle East. Do what Latin America's done. Do what most countries have done. Get rid of the dictatorship and get democracy. They had the Arab Spring about 7 years ago. Arabs in those countries realised that their governments weren't very good, their countries weren't very advanced compared to Europe, America, and Australia, etc. And their crappy governments have been saying, oh, you're great here, Europe's terrible. There's prostitution, it's outright a terrible place. But people started going there for holidays and using the internet to find out what it was like. So they had the Arab Spring. And the Arab Spring was trying to bring democracy to the Middle East. It worked in Tunisia. I'll tell you why it worked in Tunisia. Their dictator was a mild, benevolent dictator. After 2 weeks of rioting, he stood down and gave way to democracy. And after about 1 year, the secular Tunisians and the religious Salafists had got around a table and got a constitution that they were both happy with. And now Tunisia is a stable democracy. There are Islamists who are trying to undermine it, but I think Tunisia will get through. But other countries weren't so lucky. Libya, Egypt, Syria, they didn't have benevolent dictators. They had the worst kind of dictators who would kill as many of their own people as necessary to stay in power. Turkey is a democracy. Turkey used to be a very, very good example of a Muslim democracy. Sadly, their leader Erdogan is becoming an autocratic leader. In Europe, in most European democracies, they've realised that long as you stay in power, it affects your mind. Even here in Britain, Mrs. Thatcher started out very good. Power went to her head. So they got rid of her. And in most countries, you're only allowed to have 2 terms as leader. And you don't get people to get power out of their head. Sadly, in Russia and Turkey, where they got leaders, they got democracy, they got round it. You could be 2 terms as Prime Minister, you then give all the powers to the President, you become the President. Then you give the powers back to the Prime Minister and you become the Prime Minister. So Erdogan and Putin have stayed in power, ostensibly legally, by manipulating the system. And both countries are going downhill. So stay with democracy and don't try and twist it.
We haven't even got it here.
Pardon?
We haven't even got democracy in this country, mate.
Actually, we go to elections regularly. We haven't got
What about
democracy.
these MPs that have ignored the people to leave the EU?
Actually, if you know about the Constitution, referendums
Yeah, we've
are
got a
not
Constitution.
legally binding, so they haven't gone against the law. I don't like what they're doing, but they haven't gone against the law. And in democracies, if we find the law that's not so good, our parliaments change the laws. We've got parliaments which are continually changing laws. That's good. It's dictatorships where they don't. That's where the problem is. So going back to Syria, the people joined in the Arab Spring, campaigned against Bashar Assad. They had demonstrations, which were ruthlessly put down by Assad. There are hardline Islamists in Syria, and I'm not surprised. I'm not against them. I'll tell you why. In most countries, you don't need hardline Islamists. But in a country like Syria, where the dictator inherited from his father, and the secret service was set up by the East German Stasi, in Syria, all members of the family, by law, have to spy on their family members and report anyone who's against the government. And if you don't, and it was found that you knew of a brother who was against the government and you've been told on him, you could go to prison or be killed. So people rightly were scared to go against the government. There was only one thing which gave them courage, and that was Islam. Belief in God is greater than the dictator. Sadly, because the dictator started persecuting the Muslims became a bit extreme. He ended up with Al-Qaeda and ISIS, who's had to stray from Islam, because Islam didn't take dictators into account. In Islam it says, solve your problems by mutual consultation. There's not one holy book which has got more democratic bits in it than that. But the worse the dictator is, the harder it is to get rid of him. So the Muslims ended up extremists. When one day Assad's gone one way or another, you'll see that Islam will moderate itself because it doesn't need to be so extreme. So I look forward to that day. He said, I'm not Muslim, but I respect Islam and I know it can do good for a country. But like all religions, it can be abused. Christianity's done exactly the same thing. Now there's nothing odd about Arabs or Muslims. We say, oh look at Libya, look at Syria, they're killing each other. In about 6 years, over 500,000 Syrians have been killed. Muslims killing Muslims. But let's go back in history, in our old people's lifetime. In the Second World War, 80 million people died in that time. Mostly Christians in Europe killing other Christians in Europe. So it's not just Muslims which do it, we've all done it. Look at the Buddhists. In Burma, the Buddhist army has killed and ethnically cleansed lots of Muslim Rohingyas. In Buddhist Sri Lanka, they've killed tens of thousands of Muslims in Sri Lanka. Tamil Tigers. So we all do it. The only reason why we speak as if we're nothing wrong with Europe is because we've got democracy everywhere. That's the only difference. When the Muslim world gets democracy everywhere, it'll be a very different place. Once every Muslim country's been democratic for 10-15 years, then we can compare Muslim democratic countries with Christian democratic countries. And it'll be a lot closer. Yes.
What about democracy like it's in the UK?
Now, you know, every country has got its own variation of democracy. Switzerland has got the best democratic system, way better than ours. In Britain, we don't have proportional representation. So one party gets 40% of the vote, but 60% of MPs in Parliament. So that's not perfect. We should have proportional representation in Britain.
So that's one version of democracy.
That's what I said. But any version of democracy is better than dictatorship.
So shall we have a democratic vote to see which version of democracy which it is in the Middle East which you wish to impose?
That's up, we won't impose it. Do you know that Tunisian, nobody forced democracy on Tunisia. The Tunisian people had a revolution, overthrew the dictatorship. The Tunisians themselves got around the table, got their own constitution. That's great. What the Muslim countries should learn is, do your own thing, and like democracies, if you find a better way, you can make small changes to your constitution, like democracies in Europe are continually doing. Oh, thank you. Cheers. So, just imagine, at the moment, the effect of Muslims in the world is rather negative. When you go on an airplane or go to the museum or something, go through a metal detector, we've got all kinds of security arrangements because of radical Islam. But just imagine, when they get democracy in the Middle East, and we don't need to fear them that way. We can get rid of we can get rid of all those things. The Muslim world will invest in education. They will start coming out with inventions like they used to in the past. Their brains now are just as good as they were several years ago during the golden age of Islam. And when they return to their Quran, or at least start going against it, then they'll get Allah's blessings. And there'll be a blessing in the world. Yes. There is democracy in the Muslim world, in Tunisia, in Indonesia, in Malaysia, in Turkey, in Senegal, and recently in Iraq,
Lebanon,
and parts of Afghanistan. So there is. Once upon a time there was no democracy in the Christian world. There is now. 3/4 of the world's countries are now democracies. And the number has been going steadily up for about 60 years, particularly since the end of the Second World War. And it's not going to stop. Even in Afghanistan, people say, oh, Afghanistan, you can have democracy in Afghanistan. Look up Afghanistan on the internet, say Wikipedia or something you trust. Do you know what Afghanistan used to be called? The Democratic Republic of Afghanistan. They used to have democracy in Afghanistan. What happened though? They asked for help in education and healthcare from the Russians, and the Russians said fine. They sent the Taksim, overthrew the government and imposed communism there. But they used to have Afghani democracy, and they have in some parts of Afghanistan now, and one day they will everywhere. One day it'll be embarrassing to be a dictatorship. I wonder what it's like for President Assad in Syria when he goes to the United Nations every September, surrounded by these democratically elected people. Oh, that's Assad. He kills his own people just to stay in power. It's embarrassing. One day, every country in the world will be a democracy.
You couldn't embarrass the likes of him.
No, not him. I expect he'll be overthrown one day. But one day, when he's gone, and he won't live forever, even if he's not assassinated or forced to stand down, because if Russia stops supporting him, he's gone. So, the future is democracy. And as I love saying, no two democracies have ever been to war with each other. When all the world's democracy, we'll solve our problems through diplomacy. I'll tell you how it works. If you're the government, a democratic one, you know in a few years' time, the people will go to the polls and either keep you in or vote to get rid of you and get someone else in. If you've taken your country to a stupid war, you lose the vote. So just to stay in power, in democracies you've got to be good. That's why it works so well, democracy. Democracy's dead? So why are there so many countries who are democratic if democracy's dead? I ask you again, most countries in the world are democracies, why did you just say it's dead? So why are still in the world most countries democracies? You're completely ignoring that. If you want to believe, hello there, if you want to believe democracy's dead, even though 3/4 of the world's countries are democracies, you can believe whatever you want to believe. Anyway,
there's got to be something wrong when 300 people can ignore the vote of 17.2 million. There's got to be something wrong.
Now, for those who understand that
they've been caught out, them MPs have been caught out.
If you're referring to the Brexit vote, firstly, in Britain, for those who know the Constitution, referendums are not legally binding. That's something to bear in mind. So far, we haven't cancelled Brexit. We're talking about we will either the deal or no deal. So we'll see what happens. But if what you say is right and the Parliament abandons it, at the next election, people will vote for the Brexit Party and then we'll take it from there. That's what happens in democracy. The government, if they try and frustrate democracy, it doesn't work because we have elections regularly. But democracy is not perfect, I agree. And that's why we've got parliaments who are still introducing new laws and changing laws.
The thing is, they've been caught out, they've been shitting on us for years, and this thing's caught them out. This thing has caught them out.
And that's good. That's how democracy works. We need an educated population who can hold them to account. That's good.
It's good.
It's good. So, Israel, why is Israel so much better than the countries around? Firstly, they're not going against God's prophecies. That's one thing. They are a democracy. Everyone has a vote. Jews, Muslims, Christians, everyone has a vote. They have an independent media. I'll tell you why independent media is essential. I'm talking Spanish fluently. Politicians, if they could, they do anything they can to get their politics through. We rely on investigative journalists digging deep and exposing them when they go wrong. It gets into the media. We've had politicians resign because of being found out. We've had them go to prison because of being found out. In Israel, their independent newspapers have exposed corrupt presidents, corrupt prime ministers, and they've both ended up in prison. That's good. But Saddam Hussein, Gaddafi, all those people like that, it'd be as bad as they like. No one dares speak out against them. You end up in prison or dead. So we need independent media.
Some of these MPs, well, constituencies, now 3/4 of the people have decided they want to leave. And you're on about something. The only reason why them MPs are still in there voting against it is because they're little few people together there, PLP, that's keeping them in. All them MPs should have been thrown out on their ear, and they're still voting against the
I'll tell you
referendum.
what, in my opinion what should happen is, next time there's a general election, those people will vote that MP out. That's the best way.
Hopefully,
Yeah.
it should be out anyhow.
Well, the majority voted that way, and all opinion polls say it's the same. Remember the European Union, both for the MEPs, the majority of the people voted for leaving parties, Brexit, Tory party. So people still say they want to leave. So so bring on the next election, absolutely.
Parties are arguing against each other. No one says, listen, here's the problem, not your government, they're the problem.
I agree, except that is that's a slightly different subject. But as far as democracy, we need journalists to expose all these crooked MEPs and our crooked MPs, and when the elections come round, we can take that into account. Yeah.
I used to be.
And so I can't carry on. So that's why Israel is so good. They don't carry on with bad policies because if you do that, you lose elections. They've got good policies because they have to, because the voters ensure it.
When I was a union official, did I go to the company and say, we'll negotiate, but we're not going to go on strike? No, the first thing you say is we're going to go on strike if we don't get what we want.
And
So
have the
you've got
vote
the
of
same
membership.
thing here now.
And the vote of membership as well.
You've got the same thing saying we won't go without a deal. They're just going to say, make you sweat.
Yeah.
Bobby, so how come them
Palestine a
MPs
mess.
can't see it?
Hamas won't have elections, and the other party, or the West Bank, were supposed to have them 6 years ago, and still haven't had them. They had them about 15 years ago, and that really said, that's not democracy. That's not
No, it's not.
democracy.
You're right.
Yeah. Why won't they have elections? They're in power, they don't want to risk losing an election, to say no more elections, or later in a few years. In the meantime, Palestine's a mess. Somebody said free Palestine. I agree, free Palestine when they make peace with Israel, as per the UN resolutions.
Well, as soon as the Americans say it's all right, they'll do it.
Who founded Zion? God. If you read the Bible, the Jewish Bible, the word Zion is used 157 times, and God says to return to Zion. So Bible Zion is something for the company.
Yeah, but one of the
He
problems...
says stop getting kids. I agree. Tell the parents to stop sending their children to throw Molotov cocktails at Israeli soldiers. Absolutely, I'm a keen environmentalist. Been for 41 years. Palestinians fight on the moment. I'm celebrating Israel and they burn down forests. What's the point of taking out on nature? The animals are dying in the forest, in an area where there's not much rain, and the Palestinians are going to destroy the environment.